My name is Sarah, and for years I believed in the picture-perfect life I had crafted. A devoted husband, a beautiful daughter, and a home filled with laughter. But beneath the glossy surface, the ripples of mistrust and doubt began to emerge. The threads of our band were trained by a persistent thorn, Mark's mother, Mrs. Peterson, who never missed an opportunity to belittle me. I often wondered if my connection with Mark could withstand the constant tension she brought into our lives. However, as the storm clouds gathered, the source of our greatest conflict became the unlikeliest ally. Dive into my journey, a story of betrayal and redemption, and discover how sometimes the most painful moments can't forget the strongest bonds. So, my name is Sarah, and this is my story. The rain tapped softly against the window, creating a melancholy rhythm that resonated with my mood. As I sat on the living room couch, watching the water droplets chase each other down the glass, I felt the weight of the past few years press down on me. When I met Mark, he was everything I ever wanted: kind, compassionate, and a rock I could always rely on. His love and care intensified when our beautiful daughter, Emily, came into the world. He was always there, ready to offer a helping hand or a comforting word. It made me feel cherished and adored. But as it often goes in life, not everything was picture perfect. The one thorn in our otherwise blissful life was Mark's mother, Mrs. Peterson. From the moment I was introduced, the disdain was clear. Her eyes, faded with age, would sweep over me critically, finding faults in everything. From the way I held Emily to the taste of the casserole I'd so carefully prepared for our first family dinner together. "I just don't understand why she can't clean up a bit," she'd murmur to Mark when she thought I wasn't in earshot. Or, "The child looks malnourished. Doesn't Sarah feed her properly?" I said to myself, trying to breathe through the frustration. "It's just the way she is. Don't let her get to you." But her words stung, particularly since Mark never defended me. He would either brush her comments aside or nod in agreement. It created a rift, a chasm, not just between Mrs. Peterson and me, but also, to some extent, between Mark and me. But then, a year ago, things took a dramatic turn. Mrs. Peterson fell ill, or at least that's what Mark told me. "She's not well, Sarah," he'd often say, eyes clouded with worry. "I need to be there for her. She's all alone." Every Wednesday and Friday, like clockwork, Mark would disappear to visit her. He'd come home late, looking drained and exhausted. Sometimes he'd carry containers, remnants of food he'd prepared for her, or medicine vials that hinted at the gravity of her illness. I tried to sympathize, truly I did, but I couldn't help but feel a spark of resentment. Here was a woman who had never shown me a shred of kindness, and now her son, my husband, was bending over backward to cater to her every need. One Wednesday evening, as Mark was about to leave, Emily clung to his leg, her big blue eyes filled with tears. "Daddy, why do you have to go? Can't we all go together?" she asked innocently. Mark patted her head, sighing deeply. "It's not a good idea, sweetheart. Grandma is very sick, and she needs some quiet." That night, lying in bed, a thought began to itch at the back of my mind. "I've never actually seen her sick," I mused aloud. Mark, already half asleep, mumbled something incoherent, but that tiny seed of doubt had been planted. Weeks turned into months, and I found myself growing more suspicious. What if Mark was lying? What if Mrs. Peterson wasn't as ill as he claimed? Every part of me wanted to trust my husband, but the evidence, or lack thereof, was starting to pile up. "I need to see her," I thought. "I need to know the truth." The following Thursday, I made a decision. Once Mark left, I would follow him. I would find out, once and for all, the truth about Mrs. Peterson's mysterious illness. But by evening, my resolve had faded. It began to rain heavily, and I watched the drops, pressing my forehead against the window in the living room. I remembered meeting Mark, our first dates, kisses, and the birth of my daughter, and thought that I did not want to destroy our relationship with speculation, jealousy, and insecurity in my husband. We swore to trust each other in everything. How could he break this oath? Friday dawned overcast and gloomy. Mark had left early in the morning, leaving a brief note saying he had an errand to run before visiting his mother. I tried calling him throughout the morning, but each call went straight to voicemail. My frustration grew with each unanswered call. The doubt that had sprouted a few weeks ago now threatened to overtake my every thought. That afternoon, a realization hit me like a slap in the face. It was Friday, grocery day for Mrs. Peterson. I remembered Mark once mentioning how he'd ensure she had all she needed given her frail condition. An idea formed in my mind. Perhaps, I thought, this could be my chance to find out the truth without raising any alarms. Despite the animosity between us, I couldn't bear the idea of the elderly woman going without food, especially if she was indeed sick. I drove to the supermarket and began filling a cart with the essentials: fresh vegetables, canned goods, milk, bread, and a few treats that I recalled Mark mentioning were her favorites. While shopping, my mind raced with all the possible scenarios I might encounter when I visited her home. Would she even let me in? The drive to Mrs. Peterson's felt longer than I remembered. Every scenario I had imagined was overshadowed by my growing anxiety. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I encountered when I finally reached her house. I rang the doorbell, clutching the grocery bags tightly. A few moments later, the door swung open to reveal a perfectly healthy-looking Mrs. Peterson, dressed in a tennis outfit, her hair neatly tied back, not a hint of frailty about her. She looked at me with surprise, her usual disdain temporarily replaced by confusion. "Sarah, what brings you here?" My shock rendered me momentarily speechless. Gathering my thoughts, I managed, "I brought groceries. Mark said, he mentioned you were ill." A look of concern crossed her face. "Ill? Why would he say that?" she mused, leading me inside. As I stepped into the familiar living room, everything looked just as I remembered from my infrequent visits. But there was no sign of any illness, no medicine bottles, no medical equipment, nothing. We sat down, and I tried to gather my thoughts. "Has Mark been visiting you every Wednesday and Friday?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Peterson looked genuinely puzzled. "No, I haven't seen Mark in weeks. He occasionally calls, but visits? No." The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. All this time, Mark had been lying. But why? What was he hiding? My head spun with questions. Mrs. Peterson, seeing my distress, offered a cup of tea. As we sat sipping, the initial awkwardness between us faded, replaced by a mutual concern for Mark. Why would he lie about something like this? And where had he been going every Wednesday and Friday? The need to confront my husband and unravel the truth grew more pressing with each passing minute. As I pulled into our driveway, the weight of the truth pressed heavily on my heart. I could see Mark pacing back and forth in the living room, glancing occasionally out the window. He looked anxious, even frantic. The front door was open before I could even step out of the car. "Sarah," he began, rushing forward, his face pale. "I've been trying to reach you all day. Where have you been?" I took a moment to gather myself. The betrayal, the deceit, the countless lies. They all bubbled up, demanding an outlet. Taking a deep breath, I met his gaze squarely. "I went to see your mother." Mark froze, his face turning an even paler shade. What did you, he stammered. "I know, Mark," I whispered, my voice thick with pain. "I know about the lies. I know she's not sick." For what felt like an eternity, we stood there, locked in a silent confrontation. Finally, Mark's shoulders slumped in defeat, and he looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "There's someone else," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I've been seeing Camilla on Wednesdays and Fridays for the past few months." The finality of his words echoed in the hollow space that had once been our loving home. The trust, once unbreakable, had been shattered into a million pieces. Tears streamed down my face, not just for the love lost, but for the life we had built and the promises we had made. Weeks blurred into a haze of lawyers, papers, and tearful nights. The divorce was swift, fueled by Mark's guilt and my determination to protect Emily from any further pain. My days were filled with challenges as I grappled with becoming a single parent and navigating the complexities of the workforce. But in the midst of this tumultuous period, an unexpected source of support emerged: Mrs. Peterson. The same woman who had once looked down upon me was now by my side, helping with Emily, offering advice, and providing a shoulder to cry on. One evening, as we sat sipping tea in my kitchen, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I was wrong about you, Sarah," she admitted, her voice filled with regret. "I judged you without truly knowing you, and for that, I'm truly sorry." The months following saw a deepening of our bond. Where there had once been hostility and resentment, there was now understanding and compassion. Together, we faced the challenges thrown our way, finding strength in our shared experiences. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I began to rebuild my life. With Emily and Mrs. Peterson by my side and a new job that I grew to love, I rediscovered myself. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined me. I had faced the worst and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever the future held.